The conservatory loomed like a crystal palace at the edge of the botanical gardens, its glass panes catching the last coppery light of the evening sun. From the outside, it seemed peaceful, filled with ferns, orchids, and tropical vines, but the moment one stepped through the wrought iron doors, the air shifted. It was thick with humidity, fragrant with damp earth and blossoms that carried a sweetness bordering on intoxicating. Maya paused at the entrance, her fingertips grazing the metal frame as the warmth wrapped around her body like an invisible shawl. She had been here before in the daytime, when tourists wandered the stone pathways with cameras in hand. But tonight, the conservatory was closed to the public. She had received a private invitation, handwritten in looping script, urging her to come after hours. She told herself she didn't believe in mysteries sent through the mail, but curiosity had always been her undoing. That, and the thrill of being somewhere she wasn't supposed to be. Her heels clicked softly against the tiled floor as she walked deeper inside. The ceiling arched high above her, latticed with beams that dripped with creeping vines. Giant leaves the size of shields swayed faintly in the damp air, their shadows shifting like restless hands. The light was dim, coming from lanterns placed discreetly along the walkways, casting golden pools that made the greenery glow. And then she saw him. At the far end of the conservatory, near the section of tropical blooms, a tall figure leaned against the railing. His jacket was discarded on a nearby bench, leaving him in a crisp white shirt with sleeves rolled to the elbow. His posture was casual, but there was a sharpness in his gaze as it caught hers, as if he had been waiting for this precise moment. "You came," he said, his voice carrying easily across the space. Maya tilted her head, feigning nonchalance, though her pulse betrayed her with its quickened rhythm. "You sent the invitation." "Of course I came. Aren't you going to tell me why I'm here?" He pushed off the railing, moving toward her with deliberate slowness. His footsteps echoed softly, mingling with the drip of water from overhead pipes that kept the plants alive. The heat seemed to intensify with every step he took, or perhaps it was just the weight of his attention. "Because this place is alive after dark," he said, his lips curving into something between a smile and a secret. "You've seen it in daylight, when it pretends to be harmless. But at night, the conservatory shows its true nature. And I thought you might like to see it." She folded her arms, though the gesture did little to shield her from the sudden closeness as he stopped in front of her. The faintest trace of cologne mixed with the scent of orchids, creating something heady that made her dizzy. "Or," she said softly, "you just wanted to see if I'd actually follow your little game." His smile widened. "Maybe both." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of unseen insects and the distant rustle of palm leaves. The air pressed close, heavy with moisture, making the fabric of her dress cling lightly to her skin. She felt aware of every detail of how near his hand was to hers, of how the glow of the lanterns threw sharp angles across his jawline, of how her breath came just a little too fast. "Then show me," she whispered. "Show me this place you say comes alive at night." Without a word, he offered his hand. She hesitated only a fraction of a second before placing hers in it. His palm was warm, his fingers strong but not demanding, guiding her along the path. Together, they moved deeper into the conservatory, where the lanterns grew fewer and shadows lengthened. They passed clusters of exotic flowers, orchids with petals like tongues of flame, lilies that released a musky perfume only after dusk. The farther they went, the wilder it felt, as though civilization had been left behind at the entrance. Maya's heartbeat kept time with the rhythm of their steps, her senses heightened by the oppressive heat and the awareness of the man walking beside her. At a bend in the path, he stopped and turned to her. The vines overhead dipped low, creating a green archway. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze held hers with an intensity that made the humid air feel charged, almost electric. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly. "If you stay, you'll understand why I brought you here." Maya swallowed hard, her lips parting as if to respond, but no words came. Instead, she simply nodded, unable to break away from his eyes. And in that moment, with the glass walls fogged by the night's growing heat and the shadows closing in around them, she realized she had stepped into something far more dangerous and thrilling than she had imagined. The path curved deeper into the conservatory, where the lantern light grew scarce and the glass panes overhead glowed faintly with the last traces of twilight. Shadows seemed thicker here, clinging to the towering palms and orchids whose blossoms gleamed like stars caught in foliage. The air was so humid it felt almost liquid, settling on Maya's skin in a sheen of heat. She tightened her fingers slightly in his hand as he guided her forward. He hadn't let go since offering it, and though he moved with the calm assurance of someone who knew the space by heart, there was a quiet intensity in the way his thumb brushed against her knuckles now and then, as though reminding her she hadn't stumbled into this place by accident. They reached a small clearing where the path widened into a circle of stone. At its center, a fountain murmured softly, water spilling from the mouths of carved cherubs into a pool surrounded by wild greenery. Glowworms clung to the leaves nearby, casting a pale, enchanting shimmer across the scene. Maya paused, taking it in. "It feels like stepping out of the city and into another world." He glanced at her, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "That's the point. The city can't follow you in here. It's just you, me, and everything alive in this heat." Her breath hitched, though she disguised it with a slow exhale. The way he said it low, deliberate, carried more weight than the words themselves. He wasn't just talking about the plants. She walked toward the fountain, trailing her fingers along the rim. The stone was slick with condensation. "And how often do you come here at night? Or am I the first?" He stepped closer, the faint sound of his shoes against stone echoing in the stillness. "Would you believe me if I said you were the only one I wanted to invite?" She turned her head, catching his gaze. The glowworms painted faint light across his face, softening the edges but making his eyes impossibly sharp. "I'd believe you," she admitted, "but that doesn't mean I'd trust you." His chuckle was quiet, low enough that it blended with the fountain's trickle. "Fair enough." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it pulsed with unspoken tension. Maya's skin felt alive, as if every beat of humidity carried awareness. She shifted slightly, the thin fabric of her dress clinging to her back. "You're sweating," he observed softly, almost teasing. "It's the heat," she replied, though even to her own ears the words sounded defensive. His gaze flicked down, just briefly, as though confirming what she said. "Yes. The conservatory likes to test its guests. It brings out what's hidden. Sometimes discomfort. Sometimes desire." Her heartbeat stumbled. She wanted to look away, to laugh at the line, but something about the conviction in his tone pinned her where she stood. The heavy air seemed to vibrate with possibility. To break the spell, she turned back to the fountain and dipped her fingers into the cool water. The relief was immediate, tiny ripples fanning out as she let droplets slide over her wrist. "Maybe you should have warned me to bring a fan," she said, her voice lighter than she felt. He stepped closer until his presence pressed against her awareness like heat itself. "Or maybe the conservatory doesn't want you to cool down." The words sank into her, and she knew it wasn't just about the weather. Slowly, deliberately, she drew her hand from the water and let the droplets trail down her arm. His eyes followed the movement with an intensity that made her throat tighten. Without realizing it, she had leaned slightly toward him. Or maybe he had leaned toward her. The space between them had shrunk to a fragile thread, taut and waiting. The sound of a bird shifting in the branches overhead startled her, snapping the tension for a moment. She exhaled and stepped back, needing space, though her body disagreed with the decision. "You make this place sound dangerous," she said, trying to reclaim some balance. "It is," he replied smoothly. "But only if you fight it." Maya studied him, trying to decide whether he was warning her or tempting her or both. Either way, she felt herself being pulled deeper into his orbit, just as surely as she had been pulled into this hidden world of heat and shadow. He offered his hand again, patient, certain she would take it. And she did, though the gesture felt less like following now and more like surrendering to something she had already chosen. They left the fountain behind, walking into the densest part of the conservatory. Here the plants pressed closer, vines draping like curtains, flowers blooming in bursts of impossible color. The paths narrowed, forcing them nearer. The smell of damp earth, heavy blossoms, and something distinctly human hung in the air. As they walked, their arms brushed. Once. Twice. Each time it sent a spark through her skin, small but undeniable. The third time, she didn't move away. When the path ended at a secluded alcove overgrown with hanging orchids, he stopped. The air here was hotter, thicker, as though the plants themselves exhaled desire. His hand tightened slightly around hers. "This," he murmured, "is where the real night begins." Maya's lips parted, but she didn't answer. She didn't need to. The heat, the shadows, the closeness between them, everything had already spoken for her. The orchids in the alcove glowed faintly under hidden lanterns, their pale petals catching drops of condensation that glimmered like jewels. The air here was almost unbearable wet, heavy, pressing against Maya's skin with a damp insistence. Her breath came shallow, as though the conservatory itself wanted to strip her of control. He hadn't released her hand, though his grip had softened. It wasn't restraint, it was a promise. His thumb traced slow, deliberate circles against the back of her hand, and though the gesture seemed simple, the intimacy of it was undeniable. Maya swallowed, her throat dry despite the humidity. "You bring people here just to watch them sweat?" she asked, trying to lace the words with humor. "No," he said, his gaze fixed on her face. "I bring them here to see what they reveal when the heat strips everything away." Her pulse quickened. She wanted to argue, to insist she was unaffected, but her body betrayed her. A bead of sweat slid down the back of her neck, disappearing beneath the fabric of her dress, and she saw his eyes follow the motion as though it were the most fascinating thing in the room. Maya shifted slightly, leaning back against the stone edge of the alcove wall. The surface was slick and cool compared to the air, but it did little to ground her. "And what do you think I'm revealing?" she asked, her voice lower than intended. He stepped closer, close enough that the warmth of him merged with the stifling heat of the conservatory. The lantern light caught the dampness at his temples, the faint sheen across his jawline. "That you're curious," he murmured. "That you're tempted. And that you're braver than you pretend." Her chest tightened. She should have looked away, should have turned the moment into a joke, but she didn't. His words resonated too deeply, stirring something she didn't want to name. The silence between them stretched, thick and charged. When his hand finally lifted, she thought for a heartbeat he might touch her face. Instead, his fingertips grazed the inside of her wrist. The touch was feather-light, almost an accident, but the effect was immediate. A shiver rolled through her, sharp and undeniable. She drew in a breath, but it came unsteady, betraying her. "You felt that," he said softly, not as a question but as a statement. Maya's lips parted, a retort hovering on the edge, but it never came. She couldn't deny it. Her body had answered for her. He leaned in, slow enough that she could have stopped him, but she didn't. The damp air thickened, humming with possibility. His face hovered inches from hers, his breath warm against her cheek, his scent tangled with orchids and earth. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered, though her voice cracked with uncertainty. "But you are," he replied, his words brushing her skin like a touch. Her hand lifted, unbidden, fingers brushing against his sleeve. The fabric was damp from the heat, clinging to the muscle beneath, and the casual contact sent another jolt through her. She didn't pull back. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Every detail sharpened the thrum of her heartbeat in her ears, the faint trickle of water in the distance, the wet perfume of flowers that seemed to pulse with their own secret rhythm. She felt suspended, waiting for something inevitable. Then a drop of water fell from a leaf overhead, landing squarely on her collarbone. The sudden coolness made her gasp, a soft sound that broke the fragile stillness. He noticed the way her chest rose sharply, the way her lips parted and something shifted in his expression. "Even the conservatory wants you to give in," he murmured. She should have laughed, dismissed it, stepped away. Instead, she tilted her head ever so slightly, her lips brushing close to his ear as she whispered, "And what if I do?" His breath caught, subtle but there, and the sound was its own kind of answer. His fingers slid from her wrist to her palm, intertwining their hands with deliberate care. It was not yet a kiss, not yet a surrender, but it was enough to make Maya's whole body hum with anticipation. They stood like that for what felt like both an instant and an eternity, close, charged, but not yet crossing the final line. The conservatory seemed to close in around them, as though holding its breath, waiting. Finally, he pulled back just enough to look at her fully. His eyes burned with something unspoken, his lips curved in the faintest trace of a smile that was equal parts promise and challenge. "Then you'll have to stay," he said. "Because this place doesn't let go once it has you." Maya's pulse thundered in her ears. She should have been afraid of the warning, but instead, it thrilled her. The first spark had caught, and deep inside, she knew there would be no turning back. The air between them had changed, no longer just heavy with humidity, but alive with something far more dangerous. Maya felt it on her skin, in her lungs, in the frantic rhythm of her pulse. She stood on the brink of something she had promised herself she wouldn't want, yet the ache of wanting was undeniable. He hadn't moved far from her, though the space between them was deliberate, as if he were daring her to close it. His hand still held hers loosely, the touch deceptively casual, though every slow brush of his thumb carried intention. "Do you feel it?" he asked quietly. Her throat worked as she swallowed. "The heat." His lips curved, but his eyes remained sharp. "Not just the heat. The pull." The word landed in her like a spark in dry tinder. She wanted to deny it, but the conservatory betrayed her flushed skin, the damp cling of her dress, the way her breaths came shallow, quickened. Every sense screamed of nearness, of desire coiled just beneath the surface. She leaned back against the cool stone wall of the alcove, hoping the contact might ground her. Instead, it made her more aware of how trapped she was by the walls, by the heat, by him. He stepped closer. Not too close, not yet, but enough that the space between them felt charged, magnetic. The orchids swayed faintly above them, releasing a fragrance richer at night, their perfume so heady it seemed to thrum in her veins. Places like this, he murmured, his voice low and intimate, strip away what we hide. Out there, you play it safe. In here, the rules don't matter. Her lips parted, though no words came. She could feel him, even without touch, the warmth radiating from his body, the subtle hitch in his breath as his gaze lingered on her face. She wanted to say something sharp, something to break the tension, but the truth was she didn't want to break it. When his hand finally lifted, the movement was slow, deliberate. His fingertips traced just above her shoulder, not quite touching, but close enough that she could feel the ghost of contact. Her skin tingled, anticipating the touch that hadn't yet come. Maya's own hand twitched at her side, restless, wanting to answer. Against her will, her body leaned ever so slightly toward him, drawn like metal to a magnet. And then, finally, his fingers brushed the bare skin of her arm. The touch was light, tentative at first, but it sent a jolt through her, sharper than any flame. She gasped softly, the sound escaping before she could contain it. His gaze flicked to her lips, and the intensity there made her heart stumble. "You don't hide it well," he whispered. "I'm not hiding," she managed, though her voice trembled. His smile deepened, slow and dangerous. "Good." The space between them collapsed. He moved closer, his body brushing against hers, his presence overwhelming in its immediacy. The heat of him mingled with the sweltering air, making it impossible to think of anything but the closeness, the ache building inside her. She should have pulled away. Instead, her hands rose, pressing lightly against his chest. The fabric of his shirt was damp, clinging to the shape of him, and beneath it his heart beat steady and strong. He didn't stop her. He simply looked down at her, his eyes dark and questioning, as though waiting for her to decide. Maya hesitated only a heartbeat longer. Then her fingers curled, gripping lightly at his shirt, pulling him closer instead of pushing him away. That was all the permission he needed. His hand slid along her arm, tracing upward to her shoulder, then finally resting against her neck. The contact was firm, grounding, yet impossibly gentle. Her breath caught, her pulse hammering as his thumb stroked once against the line of her jaw. For a moment, he didn't move further. He just held her there, suspended in the unbearable tension of almost. The conservatory seemed to fall silent, the world reduced to the space between their lips. And then he closed it. The kiss was not rushed, not desperate. It was deliberate, steady, a claiming of space they had both been circling around since the moment she entered. Heat surged through her, not just from the air but from the undeniable truth of his mouth against hers. Maya's hands tightened in his shirt, pulling him closer, even as the wall pressed cool against her back. The orchids overhead trembled, their petals brushing together with a sound like a whisper. When he finally pulled back, only slightly, his forehead resting against hers, she was breathless, her skin damp not just from the conservatory but from the storm now raging inside her. "This," he murmured, his voice rougher now, "is what the night is for." Maya's lips parted, her chest rising and falling in quick rhythm. She should have been afraid, should have pushed him away, but instead she whispered, almost helplessly, "Then don't stop." His answering smile was slow, hungry, and she knew the heat in the conservatory had only just begun to rise. The conservatory seemed to close around them, sealing them in a cocoon of glass, foliage, and heat. Every breath Maya took was thick with humidity, but it wasn't the air making her dizzy anymore, it was him. The kiss had undone something in her, something she hadn't realized she'd been holding tight. And now, with his mouth so close, his hand steady against her neck, she no longer cared about pretense. He didn't rush. His lips brushed hers again, firmer this time, coaxing rather than taking, as though savoring the slow unraveling of her restraint. Maya's fingers, still twisted in the fabric of his shirt, loosened only to press flatter against his chest, feeling the solid beat of his heart. Her own pulse matched it, wild and reckless. She parted her lips slightly, and his breath mingled with hers warm, tasting faintly of sweetness she couldn't place, maybe the orchids, maybe just him. His tongue touched hers in a tentative stroke that sent fire racing down her spine. Her knees softened, and she had to lean more fully into the wall behind her to stay grounded. The sound she made was unintentional, a soft, caught in her throat murmur, but it was enough to shift everything. He deepened the kiss, his hand sliding from her neck down to her waist, settling firmly at the curve of her hip. The grip was confident, but not controlling. It made her feel wanted, not captured. Maya pressed against him, the damp fabric of his shirt sticking to her palms, the hard lines of his body undeniable through the barrier of clothes. The heat between them swelled until it felt like the conservatory itself might shatter from the pressure. When his lips left hers, it wasn't to pull away, it was to trail lower, brushing along her jaw, down the side of her neck. The scrape of stubble against her skin made her shiver, and she tilted her head instinctively, giving him more. His breath was hot against her collarbone, and when his lips closed over the spot where the drop of water had landed earlier, she let out a trembling sigh she couldn't hold back. "You taste like the night," he murmured against her skin, the words half whisper, half confession. Her laugh was shaky, breathless. "That doesn't even make sense." "It does to me," he said, and kissed her again, harder this time. The orchids above them swayed, as though stirred by the heat radiating from their bodies. Maya felt everything heighten, the scent of damp earth, the slickness of sweat on her skin, the faint sound of trickling water somewhere deeper in the glass maze. But above all, she felt him, his touch, his closeness, the way he kissed her like he had been waiting far too long. Her own hands moved without thought, sliding upward to his shoulders, feeling the tense strength there. She tugged lightly, urging him closer, until the last sliver of space vanished. His body pressed against hers, warm and solid, and her breath caught at the sudden intimacy of it. The alcove seemed to pulse with them, the humid air wrapping tighter, amplifying every sensation. The cling of her dress, the friction of his shirt, the tremor in her thighs as his hand slid from her waist to the small of her back, holding her flush against him. Time dissolved. There was no before, no after, only the fever of the present, the press of his lips and the taste of him and the reckless abandon of letting go. When they broke apart again, both of them breathless, his forehead rested against hers. The silence between them was filled with the sound of their quickened breathing, the rhythm almost in unison. Maya closed her eyes, letting the moment settle into her, the truth of it undeniable. She had crossed a threshold. There was no undoing it now. He brushed his thumb over her lower lip, swollen from his kisses. "You still think you shouldn't be here?" Her laugh came out soft, low, shaky. "I think I should have been here all along." His answering smile was slow, a promise and a challenge at once. He pressed another kiss to her lips, lingering, savoring, before pulling back just enough to whisper, "Then stay with me tonight. Let the conservatory have us." Maya's answer was not words but the way she kissed him again, fierce and certain this time, surrendering fully to the heat. The conservatory no longer felt like a place to Maya, it felt like a living thing, a glass cage brimming with warmth and shadow that had drawn them in and now refused to let them go. Every pane was fogged with condensation, every plant seemed to lean closer, listening. The air was heavy with the mingled scent of orchids and damp earth, but layered now with something unmistakably human: heat, breath, skin. She and he had slipped lower into the alcove, away from the faint path where lanterns glowed in the distance. Here, the light was softer, filtered through leaves, painting them in streaks of green and gold. His shirt clung to him, damp with the night's humidity, and when Maya's fingers brushed across it, the warmth beneath startled her. He was fire disguised as flesh. He kissed her again, slower now, lingering as though he wanted to memorize the shape of her mouth. His hand traced the line of her spine, steadying her even as her knees weakened beneath the weight of sensation. She let herself sink against him, no longer resisting the gravity that had been pulling her toward him since the moment she walked through the conservatory doors. "Tell me something," she whispered when their lips parted, her breath fanning across his jaw. His eyes opened, dark and watchful. "What? Why me?" The question slipped out before she could decide if she wanted the answer. He studied her for a long moment, his thumb brushing absently along her jaw as if he needed the touch to think. Finally, he said, "Because you don't come here looking for escape. You come looking for something you don't admit out loud." The words struck her like a mirror turned on her own reflection. She wanted to deny them, to laugh, to break the intensity with a quip. But she couldn't. Because he was right. She hadn't come here to be polite or cautious, she'd come because something inside her had wanted to be undone. Her silence was its own confession. He leaned closer, pressing his forehead lightly against hers. "And because I saw it the first time you stepped through these doors in daylight. You looked at this place the way most people look at another person, hungry, searching." Her chest tightened. She remembered that day vividly: the heat, the press of tourists, the strange allure of the conservatory itself. She had felt watched then, but she hadn't known it was him. "So you planned this?" she asked, her voice hushed, more curious than accusatory. His lips curved faintly. "I invited you. The rest is happening because you chose to stay." The simplicity of it unraveled her further. She had chosen this. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Her hand lifted, trembling only slightly as she cupped his cheek. The roughness of stubble rasped beneath her palm, grounding her in the physicality of him, in the reality that this wasn't just the conservatory's spell, it was their own. He kissed her palm, the brush of his lips tender, reverent. The intimacy of the gesture stole her breath more than any fevered kiss. Around them, the conservatory whispered, leaves shifting, water dripping, night creatures humming. The world beyond the glass might as well not exist. Here, it was only them, and the heat that tangled them together. Their kisses grew softer for a time, less urgent, as if both were savoring the slower rhythm after the storm. Maya felt herself learning the contours of him, the cadence of his breath, the way he lingered just long enough before pulling back to look at her, eyes dark with something deeper than desire. And in those pauses, she realized, it wasn't only passion binding them. There was something else threading through the night: recognition, maybe, or the dangerous beginnings of trust. She rested her head briefly against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. His arm tightened around her, protective, anchoring her in the dizzying haze. "You should know," he said after a silence, his voice low, "if you walk out those doors when the sun comes, none of this will follow. The city doesn't care about secrets kept in glass." Her fingers curled lightly against him, the choice in his words sinking deep. "Stay," and the conservatory would claim her fully. Leave, and this night would fade like mist. Maya lifted her head, meeting his gaze. And if I don't want it to fade? His answer was a kiss, deep and certain, a sealing of the unspoken vow between them. The conservatory seemed to tremble with them as the night stretched deeper, pulling them past the point of no return, into a heat that belonged to no one but them. The first pale light of dawn touched the glass panes of the conservatory, soft and diffused, transforming the humid interior into a muted watercolor of green and gold. Outside, the city stirred, oblivious to the night's secret, but inside, the air still pulsed with warmth, the residue of passion, the lingering scent of flowers, and the unmistakable memory of skin pressed together. Maya stirred in the quiet, her body still entwined with his, reluctant to let the night end. The alcove, once shadowed and secretive, now glimmered with soft morning light, revealing droplets of water clinging to leaves, orchids still glistening, and the gentle fog that rose from the earth. He shifted beside her, brushing a damp lock of hair from her forehead. His eyes caught hers, dark and intense, and for a moment, they didn't speak. The silence was comfortable, heavy with the shared memory of the night, the heat, and the intimacy that had unfolded between them. "You're quiet," he said softly. Maya exhaled slowly, letting herself smile. "I'm thinking." He tilted his head, curious. About how easy it was, she admitted, her voice husky, to forget the world outside these walls. How alive everything felt. How real. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned closer and pressed a kiss to her temple, gentle, grounding. The conservatory has a way of stripping away distractions. Only what's essential remains. Maya felt her fingers brush along his chest, tracing the contours she had memorized in the night. "And what's essential?" she asked. He smiled faintly, a slow curl that held both mischief and sincerity. "Right now. You. Me this." The simplicity of it struck her. Nothing in the world could compete with what they had shared here. The heat, the shadows, the reckless surrender, it had created something singular, something neither of them could replicate anywhere else. Maya shifted, resting her head against his shoulder, listening to the steady beat of his heart. The rush of adrenaline, the fire of desire, had softened into a deep, quiet warmth. She had given herself completely, and yet, the vulnerability didn't frighten her. Instead, it felt like truth, the undeniable connection forged in the night's heat. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. "We have to leave soon," he murmured. Her eyes flicked toward the glass doors, where the morning light pooled, illuminating the conservatory in a soft, golden glow. "And if we don't want to?" He chuckled, low and amused, brushing his lips along her hairline. "Then we'd be trapped forever in the heat." Maya laughed softly, leaning into him, savoring the warmth of his body and the lingering pulse of desire that had yet to fade. "Maybe I wouldn't mind," she whispered. "You wouldn't," he agreed, pressing another fleeting kiss to her forehead. "But the city will eventually demand us back. The world outside always does." Her fingers intertwined with his, holding onto him, holding onto the night, as though physical touch could tether her to this moment indefinitely. "Then we'll carry it with us," she said quietly. "The memory, the heat, everything." He nodded, eyes softening. "Yes. Everything." A soft breeze drifted through a slightly open window, carrying with it the faint scent of damp leaves and blossoms. Maya inhaled deeply, letting it fill her senses, imprinting the night into memory. She could feel the conservatory lingering on her skin, in her hair, in her very pulse, a quiet reminder of the fire that had burned between them. He pressed one last kiss to her lips, slower this time, lingering, as though sealing the memory. "Promise me something," he whispered. She lifted her gaze, meeting his, heart still pounding. "What?" "Don't forget this," he said. "Don't let the world dilute what we found here." Maya smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. "I won't." Together, they stood, hands still entwined, stepping slowly toward the doors. The conservatory exhaled behind them, a living, breathing witness to the night, fogged glass and trembling leaves standing as testament to what had passed. They emerged into the city's muted morning, sunlight glinting off windows, cars moving in predictable lines, oblivious. But Maya didn't feel oblivious. She felt alive, every fiber of her charged with the memory of heat, passion, and connection. She glanced at him, and their eyes met, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Whatever the world outside demanded, they had this night. They had each other. And they had the memory of a glass conservatory that had held their fire, secret and eternal, in its humid embrace. As the doors closed behind them, sealing the lush heat from the awakening city, Maya knew that the conservatory wasn't just a place, it was a beginning. A beginning that neither of them would ever forget.